Good morning, everybody. Yes, it's a great honour to be here for Play England. I must admit, I was reluctant to get involved with the COVID issue earlier this year, and I actually studiously kept away from it. But the Play Safety Forum kind of leaned on me to get involved and write some papers about it, and I did that. May I have my first slide, Nicola? Is it there? Is my slide there, Nicola?
I think it's coming.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I mean, my interest in play actually started 30 years ago, and it was mainly framed around the conflict between the risk of injury, which many people were trying to reduce, and the benefits of play. And the risk of injury side of the story had kind of dominated for a decade or so, such that play opportunities were being in some way curtailed. Oh, there we go. So that's the header for my slide. May I have the next one, Nicola? Thank you. Yep. So my interest in play over the decades has been about this balance, because you can't have your cake and eat it. You've got to accept some risk of accidental injuries in order to acquire the massive benefits associated with play. Nicola, next slide, please. And this now, of course, is this balance between accidental injuries and health benefits is now being perturbed very much by the COVID crisis. And here we go. Yep, thank you. It's not surprising. I mean, COVID is obviously seriously important issue for the health of the nation, but it does have lots of consequences for play. And one of the problems is that play doesn't figure very highly on the agenda when people are thinking about control measures for COVID. And so there can be many serious unintended consequences for play provision as a result of more general COVID restrictions. So this slide here summarizes the work which was done for the Play Safety Forum, and Tim Gill and Andy Yates contributed to that, and Lawrence Ball and the second review. We did a paper in June this year for the Play Safety Forum, and we updated it in September. There's masses of research being carried out globally, as Anita has pointed out. Keeping up with all of this is quite a challenge. So all we could actually do was review the information which was coming out as best we could. Now, much of this research, although there's an enormous amount, is not at all focused on children's play provision, and so you have to make lots of extrapolations from the work which has been done to the play situation. Now, the Play Safety Forum was particularly interested in these four questions, which you can see here. What is the risk to children from outdoor play deprivation as a result of the COVID restrictions? What is the risk to children from COVID itself? To what degrees do children transmit the infection to other people, adults? And to what extent are outdoor surfaces, which technical people call fomites, involved in transmission? So those were the questions which we looked at. Now, the research found, or the review of the research, is basically that critical illness in children is extremely rare. In fact, in the UK, the national statistical data shows that up until June, while there were 10 deaths of children and young people under 19, we had 40,000 in older people. So that shows you that the risk to children is actually very minor in comparison with that to older people. So there's lower rates of infection in children, and the consequences tend to be mild. And this is supported by research from all around the world, including the UK, US, Korea, and other places. With respect to transmission by children, there are two types of studies out there which look at this. There's, on the one hand, we've got epidemiological studies which look at the big picture, basically, overall statistics and so on. And you can infer something about transmission by children to adults from that information. In addition to that, though, there are small case studies which might look, say, at a school, an incident in a school, to look at the transmission between children and teachers and so on, or within an individual dwelling. So both of these studies are useful, and the outcomes from that kind of work is that the main transmission is between adults, adult to adult, and then from adult to children, and the transmission from children to adult is pretty small. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty around this because the research is struggling to control all the variables which are involved, but it looks like transmission from children to adults is small, particularly for younger children. In terms of let's see, the transmission, the viability. Oh yes, talking about transmission of COVID via outdoor surfaces. Now, this is a lot of indirect evidence that the virus can exist on surfaces indoors for hours or even days in some cases, but there's a big question about whether it's viable or not. And the view at the moment is that it is not viable, that although you can detect it some days after it's been first found on surfaces, it is not viable, it's not going to cause infection. So there's a lot of recent research, even after our September report, which supports that position. When you move to the outdoor situation, there's a view that the presence of ultraviolet radiation actually deactivates the virus, so it's even less likely to spread the COVID infection. So could I have the next slide, please? So in terms of risks from play deprivation, we know we've got evidence from the UK, Canada, and many other places that it has led to reduced physical activity, and social and emotional consequences are highlighted as a result of this lack of freedom to play. So that's quite a serious issue. And in the UK, we had already this depressing background that 15-year-olds are found to be the unhappiest in Europe, and this comes from the Good Childhood Report 2020 by the Children's Society. So we're already starting from a depressed situation, and there's been a gradual decline in happiness of 10 to 15-year-olds in the UK over the last decade. I'm sure Helen may well have something to say about that, but this is actually a warning that things are not good in the UK, and COVID is potentially making it worse, and we really need to be thinking about that. So could I have my other slide, please? So here we have, this is the risks from COVID-19 to children. The international research does not focus on play, as I said earlier, so we have to extrapolate. So all of these conclusions have an element of uncertainty about them. But the conclusions are that the risks from COVID to children playing outside is very low. That's because children tend not to pick it up. Even if they pick it up, the symptoms are mild. And if you're outside, the risk again is lower than if you're inside. Secondly, transmission of the virus is mainly from adult to adults, or adult to child rather than child to adult. And thirdly, Transmission mainly occurs within households and some workplaces. And then finally, although the virus can remain on indoor surfaces for hours or days, its viability in real life situations on surfaces is small. So next slide, please. Yep, so this is my last slide. I mean, this is basically a warning, which was not penned in relation to COVID at all, but it's by my friend and colleague David Seedhouse. He says we really need, when we're thinking about any particular risk, what we need to consider is the trade-off, because when you implement safety measures, they always have unintended consequences. Sometimes the unintended consequences of the safety measures can be worse than the initial risk with which you're trying to deal. And so we need to be particularly careful in this situation of children and play about how we make balanced decisions. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. That was comprehensive and good as an overview. We have got a couple of questions that I just wanted to ask you what you thought about them. One of the specific questions is it safe to use large outside sand pits? And I don't know if you have a view on that specific. I don't know if that counts as a fomite sand. On that specific question, sand pits are really relevant and most of them are closed currently. So it'd be good to hear your thoughts.
Okay, well, I think it's pretty safe to say no scientific study of this has been done. So let's think about it. So here you have to use your brain and your worldly experience and any knowledge you have. I mean, I would think that in terms of sand pits, I mean, if you're outside, the research, what there is saying that transmission from surfaces the risk is very small, because the virus is not viable after a short period of time. And therefore, the main risk is going to be people, aerosols. So really, the risk in the sandpit is going to be determined by how many children are in the sandpit, what the density of occupation of the sandpit is. And if it's pretty small, I would think that the risk would also be small. And yes, so it's really to do with aerosol transmission. I don't think the sand itself is going to host the virus in a viable form. So that's all I can say about that.
Okay. And so would you, just out of interest, would your answer be different if we asked you about rubber, for example, a rubber piece of equipment or a swing that's made out of rubber? Is it still mainly the aerosol connection, or are there differences with the surfaces? I'm
sure it's mainly the aerosol which is transmitting. It's not the surface. I think whatever the surface is outdoors, the risk of transmission is small. I did ask my postman the other day, what's the advice to you? You're delivering all these packages all the time. And he said, well, just to be sensible about it and wash your hands and stuff like that. I think that's the answer, really. Okay.
All right. And one of the questions further to that is, I presume, an indoor plastic ball pit. So I know that in terms of the governance guidance from the government, they often talk about soft play indoor areas as if they're in a special, terrible type of a place. So do you agree with that? Is that about being indoors, or is that being...
I think that's largely about being indoors. So I mean, I haven't looked into that, but I would suspect, again, it's the main route is aerosol transmission. It's not touching the stuff in the ball pit. And I noticed that, is it Liverpool, where it's recently been agreed that they can open their gymnasia. So, initially there was opposition to that, but the gymnasium people showed that actually the number of people who had got COVID through going to gyms was very, very small, and it was not in any way a high risk situation. So those places have now been opened. The same thing might happen with indoor play.
Okay, all right, that's really helpful and useful. I think I'm going to ask Helen to come in and do her piece next. I think so far we've learned that it's mainly aerosol rather than the surfaces, and I think that is a good core thing to remember as we